Today we've got a great malicious compliance story where someone was sarcastically told to call the fire department and they followed through. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, you want these ads done 3 months in advance? No problem, boss. Longtime lurker, but I finally have something to share that's happened within the last 2 months. I work as a senior graphic designer for a company for 5 years now. Originally, it was only a team of 3. A marketing manager, a marketing executive, and myself. The former 2 have since quit, and you'll find out later why. A huge part of my job is to handle a huge advertising schedule and a project management system, PMS, for which I design print and digital ads for. Enter my difficult micromanaging manager. He's the VP of Sales and Marketing who's been with the company for 30 plus years. His way of quality control is to force all of our marketing materials to go through an approval process in our PMS, in which everyone else has to give their feedback, and only then will my manager give the final sign-off once it reaches him. On top of that, he insists on being copied on every notification for every single step of the way. So every single ad I produced had to be sent through our PMS while tagging the product managers and proofreaders. Those individuals would then comment feedback for changes needed, or if the ad is approved, they would mark it complete and then send it along to the next person. It would end with this micromanaging manager who would have the final say on whether it's good to be sent out or not. Sometimes the process would be flawless, as everyone would approve it the first time with no changes needed. But when it got to my manager, he would reject it and I'd have to do it over pending his remarks. The thing with our PMS is that you can see timestamps of when people viewed updates. He's on our project board, so he gets all the updates, and he easily could have interceded earlier and let me know if changes were needed to pass his check so I'd not waste my time. But because of the way he is, he only wants to see the final drafts after everyone else sees them. Everyone else always seems to move things along in a timely fashion, but when it finally gets to my manager, he would just let it sit and then you'd have to constantly check to see if he marked it off. When I pushed back and stated how arduous this all is, his tone-deaf reply was to have it done 3 months in advance. He also insisted that the ads I produced have to look different each time for each publication's insertion order. So after 4 years of handling all this by myself, I was barely meeting deadlines, and the quality of my work started slipping as I was making really stupid mistakes. Every few months, I would ask my manager if we were going to hire an additional designer for our department since we're doing more marketing, and every year I would hear, "It's not in our budget right now." Things came to a head during one of my biannual reviews where I told my manager bluntly in front of HR that we desperately needed to hire an additional designer, as there was no way for me to hit the 3 months ahead goal that he keeps parroting. He actually asked me, and I quote, "Is it typical for companies to have more than one graphic designer?" I'm dead serious. I showed how I handled everything by myself as best as I could at that point, and I was getting burnt out. For those that may ask why I stay, they compensate me very well without having to commute into a major metropolitan city. A golden handcuff situation, if you will. By the end of the meeting, my manager finally caved and gave me permission to hire an additional designer who started with us this past January. While showing him the ropes on our design systems, he told me the manager said something snarky to him along the lines of, "I never imagined having to hire 2 designers. You guys should have no problem being 3 months ahead on ads now." Are you kidding me? Over the years, I watched my manager as he hired a plethora of account executives and replacements for our department, most of whom quit within months under his watch. But he's going to give me crap for needing 1 designer after I made things work for 4 years by myself? I was so infuriated by his comments that I decided, he wants ads done 3 months in advance? Okay, bet. I trained the new designer on our approach to the advertising schedule in the PMS and the ins and outs of the approval process, and we went to work. We both proceeded to bury my manager in notifications as we churned out ad after ad after ad, pushing items through the pipeline with my manager receiving notifications on every single update. When the tasks ended at him and we got no response, we set up automations to ping him every hour calling for his approval. We would also send detailed weekly reports stating our progress and also made it inherently clear to mention our goal was to be 3 months ahead of deadlines. By this past May, in time for one of my biannual reviews, my manager made an announcement. He announced my coworker, the marketing assistant, would be promoted to the vacant marketing manager position. Furthermore, they would now be handling the advertising schedule and be the final point person going forward. My manager also asked to have all notifications for him be removed as he didn't have the bandwidth anymore to monitor it and is taking a step back from overseeing us. We collectively broke my manager after only 5 months of doing exactly what he asked, and I've got to say, things have improved greatly so far. Our new marketing manager is very laid back, as we're still getting things done ahead of schedule, and he's really good at what he does. We've also since hired 2 more additional employees for our department, and we've been steadily growing. My newly appointed coworker recently joked with me and the junior designer about how he wanted to go over the advertising schedule for next year, but he elected to not see anything and fully trusted my coworker to handle it completely on his own. Funny how that works. It definitely doesn't take a genius to see how terrible of a pipeline that is. I mean, when you gotta feed it down the conveyor belt and any one of those people can say, nah, that's not good enough, send it back to the chef. And then after it finally passes all of those people's appreciations and finally gets to the last person, the guy who has to decide if it looks good enough to eat, who chose willfully to not look at any of the ingredients along the way, and for them at that point to be able to say, no, it still doesn't look good enough, and send it right back to the very beginning to be baked over again. I mean, regardless of 1 worker or 5, it's no wonder you're falling behind schedule. I mean, the reason the micromanager even stepped down from their job and allowed it to kind of fix itself is because instead of 1 pie from OP to poke their head in at and take a look at, there were instead like 3 or 4 from 2 people. Too much work for him. Rudderface420 commented, so the new person got promoted to manager over you? OP responded commenting, earlier I mentioned the part about replacements for our department. We went through 3 marketing managers, including the one that was already there before I was hired. That person quit, and then my manager hired another one several months later, who then also quit a couple of months later. Rinse and repeat 1 more time. So while the position was vacant for a while, my manager finally elected to promote my coworker to fill the void because it made sense. Keep in mind that not everyone wants to climb the ladder, as I was a manager once and I hated it. The extra responsibilities, duties, traveling, and overstepping boundaries of work-life balance that come with it. I'm already seeing my coworker getting an influx in his workload. I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I'm getting manager pay for a mid-level role and duties. Plus, I find my skills to be at the best in a supporting role, which I'm lending my guidance and helping my coworker adjust to in his new role. My current manager did ask me during one of my past reviews, what's next for me, in a bid to see if I wanted to move up. I was able to squirm out of it as I knew it would be in store for me and preferred to keep what I have. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of malicious compliance, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below? That said, our next story is, supervisor said, don't just type BRB, so I told the whole team I had to poop. So this recently happened in my call center type job. My brand new supervisor, promoted for all the wrong reasons, wasn't exactly qualified. I could write a whole post on that, but the gist is that she only got promoted because she was friends with the boss and is always giving him advice on the women he dates. Anyway, we had a Teams chat where we kept each other updated and asked for help with things. Normal procedure was simple. If you stepped away, we would typically just type BRB so everyone knew you weren't available for calls. Did this for years with no issues. Well, new supervisor decides that's not good enough. She needs to assert control and dominance. She announced to us in one-on-one convos that we all had to start giving specific reasons for why we were stepping away. I told her I wasn't really comfortable announcing to the entire team every time I had to use the bathroom. She basically shrugged and said, it's the rule. We need transparency so I know what everyone's doing. Okay, we've had no issues for years, but whatever she says goes, I guess. The very next time nature called, instead of a boring BRB, I typed, BRB, going to go poop in the bathroom. Immediately, she PM'd me in Teams saying that was not professional. I reminded her that she told us to be specific, and I was just following directions. After that, others started joining in. Some favorites were BRB, gonna stand in front of the urinal and do an impression of a water fountain. BRB, going to blow my nose to try to dislodge this giant booger. Within a week, the supervisor started telling us we didn't need to be so specific when stepping away from our desks. Like, yeah, we know. For anybody on that team that's like a mild creative, this would be like a field day trying to come up with new ways to phrase things. Kind of exactly like the water fountain one. Like, I don't know, BRB going to investigate a potential hydraulics leak in the bathroom. Decoherent Doc commented, I kinda want more examples, LMAO. The impression of a water fountain one is pretty funny. OP responded commenting, well, one other coworker said, BRB, baby just projectile vomited all over me. Our next story is, if you're going to watch TV, you have to include your little sister. When I was around 10, my parents had a rule. If the TV is on, your little sister has to be allowed to watch too if she wants. I usually wanted to watch cartoons, and she always wanted those annoying sing-along shows, arguments every day. One Saturday morning, I turned on the TV, plopped her down in front of it, and immediately put on a wildlife documentary about ants. I sat there, remote in hand, patiently explaining every single scene to her like it was the most exciting thing in the world. She lasted about 6 minutes before running off. My dad poked his head in, saw her already running off to play, and asked why the TV was still on. I told him she didn't want to stay. I don't know if my parents knew what happened, but for some reasons, my parents quietly dropped the "you must include her" rule for the rest of that summer. Cartoons were mine again. I thought it was gonna be like, she's deathly afraid of like bugs or ants or something, but no. OP managed to find something mindless enough to make a 6-year-old bored and run off. Just altogether give up on their chance of getting their sing-along show? Also, can I just say that I'm scared at what these sing-along shows were? Like, was it one of those old-school Disney VHS sing-along tapes, or is it like the new age Johnny thing that happened? You know, like Baby Shark or something. Malfast43 commented, Dad making it sound like there was no reason for you to want to watch TV if your sister wasn't watching too? Smart way to go about it without getting in trouble though. Most would put on something that was too grown up for the younger sibling or was scary. Our next story is, if you're going to eat snacks, make sure you share with everyone. When I was a kid, my mom had a rule that if anyone opened a bag of chips or cookies, they had to share with everyone in the house. Fair enough, until I realized I could use it against the rule. One day, I wanted cookies but didn't feel like splitting them with my brothers because they inhale everything, so I took the rule literally. I grabbed the family pack of cookies, walked room to room, and gave one cookie to every single person. My parents, my 3 brothers, even left one on my baby sister's high chair tray. Then I walked out to the yard and gave one to our neighbor who was mowing his lawn. Even the dog got one. Now, since everyone had been given their share, the rest were mine to eat in peace. Mom couldn't even be mad because I technically followed her rule. My brothers and mom still bring it up and laugh about it whenever we talk about childhood loopholes. Now, I'm not saying it's like a scientific thing, but isn't there something to the concept of when you ask kids of a certain age a question or a trick question, a lot of times they don't process it like an adult would, and therefore they get very creative answers or like the correct answer to the trick question that adults just oftentimes miss? I feel like following that kind of same logic sort of applies to these kinds of situations where parents set rules, and then these kids devise crazy ideas or plans to get around them that, like, you could say technically complies, but most adults are going to be like, come on. Pizza Sauce 85 commented, had a Spanish teacher in high school that said that we could eat in class if we brought enough for everybody. Well, very few high schoolers had extra cash to buy enough for everyone, so it seldom ever happened. One day during lunch, we could leave campus. Some friends and I went to a local grocery store to pick up some groceries for one of their moms. I happened to notice a bunch of snacks on sale and joked that we should get enough to share with the whole class. My friends all agreed, so we each picked up random things. I bought 2 packs of cookies and 2 cans of whipped cream. One guy bought 4 big bags of chips, another bought several packs of gum, another bought 2 cases of soda, and the last guy bought a big bag of grapes, peanut butter, and Ritz crackers. We get back to class with backpacks full of stuff, and I take out 1 pack of cookies. The teacher tells me I can't eat in class, so we all took out the rest of the food and put it on our desks, just staring at him. He chuckles and shakes his head and then says, "Let me get the plates and the piñata." We all had a blast. Everyone got a weird but tasty treat, and we even had random teachers coming over to snag a cookie because they heard through the grapevine that we were having a fiesta. We also got out of a pop quiz because the teacher had one planned for us, but changed his mind because, in his words, you can't have a quiz during a party. Our next story is, no home equipment? No problem. So I work for an agency, and ever since I started 8 years ago, I've always had my own computer equipment like keyboards, mice, etc., and no one has questioned it, not even IT. I get moved to a new small shared office, bring in an extra monitor from home so that I have 3 monitors, and get to work. I receive a call after they investigate my office, saying it's against policy to use home equipment, despite me having done so previously and IT being aware of it. Immediately, I make a list of all the stuff I'm using that the company should then provide for me, like headphones, a docking station, and monitor for working at home. I unplug my monitors, mousepad, keyboard, and mouse, plug back in the company's hardware, and slow down my work output drastically. I then take the monitor they gave me and plug it in to replace the monitors I had to take down, and look at them with a poop-eating grin when management came to check if I complied. Well, you got what you wish for, and now since my work output is dropped, they're forced to rebalance the workload. Now, I don't know what Work OP does, but I just have to say, if you're doing any kind of like sheet inputting or, to be honest, most things on the computer, going from 1 to 2 monitors is pretty crazy. Like, if you've ever had to sit down at a computer and do a task where you're copying one thing from one window, having 2 monitors where you can just copy and move right over and paste it without having to switch windows, that alone feels so much better. Juntar74 commented, "Manager, hopefully not Mangler here. There are good business reasons for these types of policies. See one example below. Usually, management would implement them in a phased rollout though, instead of overnight. Like first, do an informal audit and identify risks and issues, and then make a plan to replace employee-owned hardware. The way your management did it, on the one hand, they absolutely deserve to have you running at less than 100% efficiency until they can provide you with the equipment you need. On the other hand, if you have a good manager, this kind of policy rollout means they're under pressures that make your troubles and annoyances trivial by comparison. Give them a break and let them know in your next one-to-one that you're struggling without the equipment, and ask them what you can do to help. If your manager's not one of the good ones, tread carefully because they won't be able to connect the dots between your lower throughput and their own ineffectiveness. At least you did it right so far by immediately requesting the hardware you need to do your job efficiently. Example, your business needs to certify for ISO 27301, business continuity, in order to win or keep a major contract. If half the monitors, keyboards, laptops, etc. in the office are personal devices, the business has a risk if or when the owners of that hardware leave. Like, they could hire a replacement for that person, but they still might not be able to function until they also replace their hardware. Our next story is the time my grandfather-in-law shut down a steel mill and got overtime rules changed. Story takes place in the 60s. Grandfather-in-law was a World War II vet, was a prisoner of war in Italy, got out of the POW camp, and rejoined his unit and then continued the war. So a verified bad you-know-what. Worked the railroad at a steel mill, just locally moving cars and setting up the train, moving stuff from one plant to the other, that kind of thing. The mill was on either side of a river with a rail bridge connecting them, and then the main rails ran right through both sections of the mill. So when he came through with a lot of cars, it would temporarily close the roads in the mill. He would get a little overtime quite often just by the nature of the job, couple hours or so per week. When it's shift change time but you're driving a train, you need to finish up before you can run the engine back to let your relief take over. So, of course, the mill decided to make a no overtime, no exceptions rule. It took him a couple of weeks to get it timed just right. At 3 p.m., his shift was over. He parked the engine right by the time clock, clocked out, and went home. He said there were almost 2 miles of cars hooked to the engine. Went through the section of the mill he was at, across the river, and into the other section of the mill. All the track was owned by the mill, so it didn't affect the actual railroad, just the mill. The mill bosses wanted to punish him. I forget the details, but the union shut that right down. Nothing happened, and the rules changed the next day. Now, I must admit I am a bit of a layman, so I'm trying to assume here, and I'm guessing what exactly happened here is because they said no overtime, they shut down and basically blocked like all kind of vehicle throughput for the entire mill. Butterfly Girl 18 echoed my sentiments, commenting, "Everyone else seems to understand this, so maybe I'm just dumb, but I think I need a diagram or illustration." OP then responded, commenting, "Steel mills are very big. There are multiple buildings and roads throughout the mills and a lot of traffic on those roads. Cranes, forklifts, trucks, etc., mostly carrying raw materials from building to building, turning ore and scrap into a sellable product. The rails for the train cars go right through the center of the mills. They have to, because a lot of the materials either come in or leave on train cars. So when he parked the train to clock out, his train had about 2 miles of cars hooked to it, effectively blocking off most of the roads in both plants. The plants are directly across the river from each other, connected by a train bridge, and the bottom of the bridge had a lot of piping welded in to carry various gases and liquids from one plant to the other. The plants depended on each other to run efficiently. One plant turned raw coal into coke to be used in a blast furnace, the other one burned that coke, so the mill owned the railroad and just transported their own materials over. The river between them was used to get shipments of coal and iron ore on barges. This is in northern West Virginia. They could float coal and ore up from anywhere in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, right up the river into the mill. The plants are smaller compared to other steel mills, but still pretty big. There's one plant still operating. I'm working here now. It was first built sometime in the 1850s. This next story is soggy cigarettes. Many moons ago, when cigarettes were much cheaper and less taboo, I was one of the many partakers in the habit. On a rainy southeast Texas afternoon, I stopped into the Circle A to procure a fresh pack. As I walked into the store, I passed by a fellow loitering out front with little more than a head nod as interaction. On the way back, however, he was much more interested in conversation after seeing me exit while opening my fresh pack of smokes. Suddenly, we were long-lost compadres, and he was all too comfortable stepping out in front of me on the rainy sidewalk, blocking my path to my vehicle. He asked, "Hey bro, let me catch one of them Rets." It took me a second to interpret, but once I figured out what was happening, I decided to comply. We were both getting rained on at this point. May as well make the most out of it. I said, "Sure bro," and finished opening the pack as he took a couple steps toward me, hand extended. I said, "Whoa, dude, how are you going to catch it from so close? Take a step back," as I did the same. Staring at me thoroughly confused, I reiterated that he asked me to catch one, so I meant to oblige. I pulled one out and flicked it fast right at him and watched as it bounced off his chest and landed in a puddle at his feet. Ruined. Mind you, these were way cheaper back then. Not to be deprived of my maliciousness, I encouraged him. "Keep your eyes on the ball, bro." Zip. Sent the next one at him. Splash. Another miss. I said, "Dude, get it together. You ain't catching nothing." Flick. Another splash. Defeated, he just turned away and started walking. I lit a victory cig and got in my truck. I don't know why, but why did this story remind me of the video of somebody handing a raccoon cotton candy? And because raccoons tend to clean their food before they eat it, they kept sticking it in the water over and over, and it just disappears. Why did this story feel like a much sadder version of that? Immediate Drawing 54 commented, "I was at an agency waiting to be sent out, and a guy asked to bum a square, so I gave him one. It was one of the cheapest brands. Another person announced he had a few Camels to share, so the guy breaks the unlit cig in half and throws it on the ground. He asked Camel Guy for a cig and he gets shut down. I just saw what you did with the cig Dave just gave you, so freak off." Our next story is, supervisor told me sarcastically to call the fire department. I did. Worked in retail between jobs way back when, early 90s. Yeah, I'm old. Get off my lawn. It was December, major department store that's no longer around. I know that doesn't narrow it down, sorry. Anyways, they tried to cram as much product on the floor as possible to the point that you couldn't walk through the aisles and had to twist and turn to get past the fixtures set up with product. I casually mentioned to a supervisor that if the fire department ever came in, they would close us down for the hazards and lack of egress. She was highly stressed and blurted out to me, "You know what? Then call the fire department." I held my hands up and said, "Easy." She assigned me my duties and that was that. Well, she did tell me to call. On the way home, I stopped by a government building that had all sorts of agencies in it, told the receptionist my plight, and she pointed to a phone on the wall. "Tell the operator I want the fire department," and they would patch me through to the station's non-emergency line. The fire chief himself answered. I told him how crowded it was and what the supervisor said. He had a good laugh and said they'd check it out. I was off the next day, but heard about it when I got back. Fire chief and a station house full of firefighters show up to do an inspection. He tells the store manager that egress is being blocked and he'd have to remove a lot of the fixtures in the aisles. Store manager says he has orders from corporate, fixtures stay. Fire chief assures him he will win the argument. Store manager stands his ground. The fire chief says, "All right, boys, close them down." They evacuated the store, all 3 levels, and closed all entrances in December, prime Christmas shopping season. Although it wasn't a weekend day, it was during the week, but still. Store manager tried to protest, and suddenly the sheriff's department starts showing up. Long story short, they were closed for 5.5 hours while the chief, store manager, and employees rearranged the store to acceptable levels. The supervisor never treated me differently, so I'm guessing she didn't remember the conversation. The store manager surprisingly did not get fired by corporate, but corporate wasn't happy. About a week later, I'm working with the store manager and supervisor when she asks why we can't do something a certain way. The store manager replied, "The fire department won't allow that." And that was it. I worked there for a few more weeks before getting a job that almost got me ended in a workplace popping, but that's a story for later. Edit 1, there are some videos on YouTube about postal poppings, one done by a woman, which is insane. Even the comments. The one I was in, the person was acting out for well over a year. Skeptic magazine had a great issue about mass, you know what, I think from 2013. One study they talked about was how the criminals never snap, but act out for usually a year or longer before committing the act. Interesting stuff. Myself, as well as other employees, expressed concern to management about the behavior and potential for violence, but they said that the employee was harmless. Didn't surprise a lot of us who it was when it happened. I could go on, but honestly most of you would think I'm lying, but I could corroborate every story. And the funny part is, other postal workers would laugh and say, "That's nothing. Let me tell you what happens at our facility." It is the most violent workplace in America, and also the most deadly. I just gotta say, the edit at the end took this into a wildly different tonal direction that I wasn't expecting. I mean, how did we go from fire chief shuts down store to rearrange end caps or whatever, to talking about postal poppings? I'm sorry, YouTube makes me be like this. Tony Snark81 commented, "A store I worked for got an unexpected inspection by the fire marshal one morning. I was in the back room sorting shipment when a coworker came running through, grabbed me to follow him, and we spent 10 minutes moving mannequin parts and other fixtures out of the electrical zones. As soon as we finished, our store manager escorted the fire marshal into that area and saw it was clean and organized. She was shocked and surprised, but managed to hide that fact. As soon as the marshal left, she came to us and asked if we had done it. She gave us both $50 gift cards as a reward for saving the store from a costly citation." MJB 2012 replied, "Nice manager. I worked in a restaurant where, in the time between the health inspector being spotted walking up to the front counter and then being let in the back door, we would take care of a half a dozen minor back-of-house violations." Never a peep of gratitude from the manager. The worst was when the walk-in freezer was 86 degrees Fahrenheit one Sunday morning. The cooler had failed and was blowing hot air in there. I knew it was pretty cold at closing time the night before, so it must have failed in the night. Boxes were warm to the touch, but the food inside was still cold, so I had the other hourly workers find places for every last bit of it, including borrowing space in the walk-in at the McDonald's next door while we got a hold of the manager and got an emergency repair guy to come in. The next day, we moved all of the food back ourselves, and it was like nothing happened. The manager didn't even give any of us a thank you. She just grumbled about the cost of the repair. Later, she got fired for embezzling. Our next story is, I made my own schedule. I work the night shift as a cashier at a 24/7 convenience store. My shift is from 10 p.m. to 5:30 a.m. Usually my coworker and I switch tasks, like she's at the counter while I help the customers. Lately, I've been dealing with constant headaches, so I asked our manager if I could take a night off, but instead of approving it, she snapped, "If you don't like the schedule, make your own." So I did. I skipped 2 nights and then worked only 4 hours on the 3rd night and took another night off after that. When I finally came back, she scolded me saying, "That's not what I meant." I told her, "Well, you said make my own schedule." So I did. Now the whole staff, whether day shift or night shift, is asking if they can customize their schedules too. Funny how she suddenly cares about clear communication. Shout out to our first manager of the year, Ma'am Knows It All. P.S. I did put my phone to Do Not Disturb so that I wouldn't notify her with calls and texts. Also, our manager only went to the store every Monday. I asked her Monday night. My working days are Monday to Saturday. I mean, OP has a very clear argument here. I bet after that point, the communication was crystal clear from that manager. Automatic Advice 803 commented, I had a third grade teacher that for some reason did not say throw it away, she would say throw it. Every time, paper balls would go flying across the room and everyone laughed. Every time. Sometimes I wonder if she did this occasionally because she thought it was funny too. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.